The next item in the audit says the city clerk's duties are not segregated or adequately reviewed, and access to monies is not sufficiently limited. Part of that would be, I know it's something that's been discussed in the meetings, part of that is the oversight that the city administrator is able to provide. I guess what's being done to make sure that those duties are segregated and we don't have to worry about the people who are responsible for collecting the money and paying the money. How are we making sure that those two are separated?
First of all, the finance person, Carrie, has been separated out from the city clerk. She works directly with Darren Chapel. Second of all, the process right now, the way it stands, the city clerk only responds to the Board of Aldermen. I think we're looking at the possibility of her responding also to the city manager and having some relationship there, some responsibility. We're also looking at dividing the duties so that the person that is paying and receiving are on different aspects, separating, so to speak.
The disbursement section of the audit, it talks about soliciting for bids and proposals. I know that in some instances the city doesn't always have to solicit for bids depending on the amount for the project. Do you see I know that there's an additional cost with soliciting for bids, at least providing legal notice for bids. Do you see the benefit to doing that for every project that the city does? Do you think it should be done for every project, or do you think it should be done for only certain projects?
Well, I think the auditor says that it needs to be done for every project over 10,000, so we will continue that. You wonder why we're not back in City Hall, okay? If I was a business person, I wouldn't let a building set for 6 or 7 months. But when you're a government facility, you have to put out the bids for remuneration, you have to put out bids for inspection, you have to put bids for restoration. It's a lot more lengthy process. And so governments do not move as quickly as private businesses. And that's important because that allows people to be involved, and it also gives more financial responsibility to the organization, and also lets more people be involved in the government. And ultimately, as the auditor said, hopefully brings you the best price and the best worker or best offer.
I apologize, this may predate you. The $195,000 purchase of computer equipment, were you here for that?
I'd have to look at that specifically. I don't remember if I was involved in that or not. I may have been.
My question...
I think it was done in the fall of 2010.
And I think it was too. My question is not necessarily about that instance specifically, but as a member of a governmental body, what would compel a group of people, and I know you can't speak for the people that were in power at the time, but what do you see compelling a group of people to approve the purchase of $195,000 in computer equipment without soliciting for bids?
I guess urgency, perhaps. Perhaps they thought that this was the best opportunity they could get for sales and service. That would be my two answers. We've always tried to put them out for bid, and I would recommend we continue to do that. You know, I think the thing I would remember, Matt, is that the auditor's report is a great opportunity as a tool to help us learn. This is the first audit that Bolivar's ever had. It's like when you're in school. The analogy I would use is you write a paper in 9th grade or 10th grade or whatever in school, and you think it's a great paper, and you turn it in, and it comes back, and you got red marks everywhere. Well, guess what? The next time you write a paper, you're going to learn and write a better paper, and you're going to learn from that. And we've learned a lot. I've learned a lot. I think the city's learned a lot, and I think the Board of Aldermen have learned a lot. And, you know, basically, the aldermen and myself are volunteers. And we're trying to do the best we can for the city. And I think this is a great guide to help us. Unfortunately, it's looking way in the past, a year and a half ago, and things have changed. We've gotten better. We haven't fixed every problem, but we're trying to.
Has the city learned not to procrastinate on purchasing land, such as the land that was needed for the UV treatment plant? What would require the city to spend $44,000 more than the appraised value for a piece of land. I'm asking that as somebody who has not seen the appraisal, and I don't know who
Okay.
conducted the appraisal, but
I will take personal responsibility for that. Okay? In the fall of 2011, we knew that we had an EPA mandated upgrade to our waste treatment plant.
you knew about it before fall of 2011, didn't
Actually, it was known several years before I even became
you? Okay.
mayor. And I think it was maybe 3 or 4 years, I'm not sure. But we started talking about it when I became mayor. And I remember having discussions and Mr. Mersch saying, that individual, I won't mention his name, but he's a resident of Bolivar, I believe, or at least the surrounding area, wanted us to buy the whole farm. And I said, and most of the aldermen thought, why buy a whole farm? We just need land that's contiguous to our waste treatment plant. Well, Mr. Mersch was supposed to negotiate it. I remember asking him, I said, Ron, have you negotiated? Well, I'm going to get to it. I'm going to get to it. Well, February or March comes and we haven't bought the land. And I'm the city manager. And so I go out and meet with the individual and I said, what do you want for this? He says, well, I want you to buy the whole farm. Except I just put a new barn up. I'm not going to sell the whole farm. And I said, well, what would you sell the 7 acres that we need? Well, he gave me a figure that was even more. I think it was appraised at $25,500, and we wound up settling for $75,000 and 3 payments over 3 years of $25,000 without interest. And you got to remember, at that time the city was financially strapped, and I thought it was the best deal I could negotiate. And I went back to the Board of Aldermen and I said, look, this is best I can do. We've got to get an EPA mandated waste treatment plant built in a year. We don't have plans, we don't have land, and the fine is going to be at least $1,000 a day if we don't get it done. And so we were between a rock and a hard place. You know, you can't move a waste treatment plant. It's not like we can find some land and move it 5 miles to the east or west. You're kind of landlocked. So I think it's a situation where we had a time crunch and we had a absolute necessity to buy it. And I thought the time that would take to condemn the land and to go through that would even add further to the pressure of getting the thing built. And fortunately, we did get it built on time, and it's operational, and we've not received a single fine, which also could have cost the city a lot of money.
Something that does predate you, though, you were first elected in April 2011.
That's correct.
It's something that could have been noticed when you first came in to office, not necessarily faulting you for not pointing this out. I'm just saying that it's something that you could have noticed. The purchase of weapons in January 2011, weapons that, for all intents and purposes, are unaccounted for. How does that happen? How does a governmental body purchase weapons with grant funds and then are not able to track them?
That is a big problem. As you know, the police chief resigned the day I was to be inaugurated as mayor. Chief Seifert quit. And so we went with a temporary chief the first several months, and we hired, the board hired John Walter, who upon coming to Bolivar became sick and ill and spent some time in the hospital, which was unfortunate. So again, we went a few more months without a police chief. And then ultimately John resigned in October of last year, and we brought in Steve Hamilton, and now we have Mark Webb. Now Steve was never a long-term solution because he was retired and he really did not want to be in. He thought at first he might want to be back as a chief, but after he got into it, he said he enjoyed retirement a little bit better. I've talked to Mark. He's Mark Webb, our current chief. We're still in the process of tracking this down. We don't know where the guns are. The money has been spent. He estimates that over $100,000 were spent for a SWAT team and SWAT training during that time. And I believe this was purchased just at or before I became mayor, and I don't know.
January 2011.
Yeah, so that's before. And so there's no way for me to know that without communication with the police chief who had resigned.
The appointed temporary chief never came forward and said, we paid for these guns, but we never received them?
No.
As far as the...
and that was Mr. Van Tassel. That was Captain Van Tassel at the time.
That was...
Steve Van Tassel.
Okay.
He was managing the special response team, and also he was acting as interim chief.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
In April of 2011.
Continuing on with the money oversight, there was a mayor's signature stamp to essentially allow the city clerk to sign a check and stamp your signature. Why would that have been created with the idea? I mean, why would it have been allowed for blank checks to essentially be signed before any amounts, any payees are entered in? What would be the reasoning behind that?
Well, the stamp, and I believe one of our bankers, Steve Hendrickson, has also a stamp. Sometimes we require 3 signatures before any city check is sent out. So it's myself, the president of the board of Alderman, John Cordell, and Steve, who is at Commerce Bank. The stamp was created for convenience and for a lot of the documents that we can't get to every day. As I've said before, we're volunteers, and particularly now, in the last 9 months, when the city has been dispersed everywhere. We've got the police department over here on Springfield, and we have the bulk of the workers either at the golf course or at Farmers Bank. It's kind of tough to get everything done. Now, I have no reason why a blank check was stamped, and that stamp is no longer in existence, and I will never let them have a stamp as long as I'm mayor, for any reason. Maybe it's naivety on my part, maybe it's just misuse of trust, but it happened, and I take responsibility. It won't happen again. This last summer, I have asked the clerk that I sign all checks, and that's been always the standard procedure. I sit down and look at the checks. I look for why they're spent. I put them in 2 piles, those that seem reasonable and occur with our budget, and those that don't seem reasonable or out of line and want an explanation. I think that's my responsibility as mayor. Number 1 is to make sure that there's no financial improprieties.
One of the items cited in the audit is a lack of adequate procedures to follow up on unpaid business licenses, and that the audit found 120 out of 500 licenses remain unpaid. How are they being issued in the first place if they're unpaid? The people aren't required to pay for them as they come to apply for their business license?
This is an operational question. You'll have to ask Darren Chappell about that. There's been some people that have gotten a business and had a check bounce. In other words, not had the resources to do that. We also have businesses that aren't paying their utility bills and have had them turned off. But as far as specifics, the only thing I can say is you need to ask Mr. Chappell about that issue.
Okay.
That's an operational deal, and I'm not aware of what's going on a day-to-day basis with that.